I'm going to ask that you, perfect. So I'm going to share my screen in a moment, and then I'll ask you to introduce yourselves in the chat if you haven't already. Just give me 1 second so I can navigate my screen sharing. And do you all see my screen? Yes?
Yes, seeing your screen.
Perfect, thank you. All right, let me go on a bigger scale so you can see it a little bit. Hi, Melanie. Oh, I thought that was your voice I heard.
Yes, hey, Taina.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, everybody. Welcome. So we are in the Healing with the Land, Growing Our Medicine workshop. My name is Taina. Michelle shared with you my Instagram earlier. I'll give you access to that later if you want to see some of the work that I do. But I have a project that I call Sankofa, Anacaona Botanicals. It's a mouthful, but it brings together many aspects of my lineage. I can tell you more about that in a moment. And basically, this is where I share a lot of my plant-related learning, plant-related medicine making, and also growing. So I'm going to bring us over to an intro page. If you could please take a moment and introduce yourselves. You can include your name, the neighborhood that you're a part of, or the city if you're outside of Boston. And if you could please share your answers to one or both of these questions. So the first one is, how does your relationship with the land that you currently live on, right, where you currently sleep, how does your relationship with that land look like? And how does it support your health and wellness? So anything you want to say about your relationship with the land that you currently live on, and also if you're growing any plants, if you want to learn to grow plants for medicine or for food, for both, because they overlap, right? So take a moment, please, and if you could share some of your ideas. Again, your name, city that you currently live in, or neighborhood if you're in Boston, anything related to your relationship with the land, for your health and your wellness, and anything that you grow or want to grow for food and or medicine. Just going to take a peek at your responses while you're typing. And then I see some of you are adding ideas around curiosities that you have around plants. Hopefully I can get to some of these. We have a very short time together. And so we're just going to scratch literally the surface of the soil, right? I'll share about some plants that I work with for food and for medicine. You may be familiar with a lot of them. And then I also want us to think about relationship, right? So I'm hoping that the time that we're spending together will be a conversation where I could hear your ideas, we could hear each other's ideas, and then I'll share some of my ideas around land relationship and also growing food and what that looks like. If you do have a question and you want to share anything, if you could please use the chat for now. I'm going to go through these slides and then I'll make space for us to chat where you'll be able to unmute yourselves. So I see some folks are talking about perennials for medicine. I think all the plants that I'm highlighting today are all perennials, right? So you won't have to put a bunch of work into replanting every year. I love that some folks are using the indigenous names of the land that you live on. This is something that I'm going to touch on in a moment. So if you know the name of the indigenous people whose land you are currently living on, right? Maybe those are your ancestors, maybe they're relatives, right? Because ultimately all humans are connected. I see some folks are artists, educators, beautiful. Let me get us to the next space and then I'll continue reading your responses in the chat in a moment. And I know some folks just got in, so we're looking at our relationship to the land, right? And it's hard to talk about relationship to the land without acknowledging the land that we currently occupy, whether that's ancestral land to us or ancestral land to other people, right? I currently live in Roxbury, right? So I spend a lot of my time between Roxbury and Western Mass. But for now, I'm going to focus on Roxbury because that's where I'm currently on. And this is where I'm currently going to be planting some of my medicine this year. So I want to take a moment for us to acknowledge that we are on indigenous land, right? This is the land of the Massachusetts people. and that's where the name of the state that a lot of us who are in Massachusetts live in, the Pawtucket as well. I'm going to show you a map, right? So if you are outside of Boston or outside of Massachusetts or outside of the Northeast, actually anywhere in the world, right, that you can find the names of the people, right, the indigenous land that you are on. There is a project that has been going for quite some time. It's a very comprehensive, really wonderful, still growing project that maps out and that looks at traditional indigenous land names, but also the overlaps in communities, right? These are not political or current political borders that separate land and people, right? So I'm in Roxbury, so I'm around, if I zoom into the map a little more, I'm a little bit around, not quite in the Wampanoag, right? The Wampanoags are down here. I'm around here, right? The Massachusetts and the Pawtucket are the main indigenous groups within that space. Oh, actually, I'm totally off. I'm right up here, the Massachusetts. I'm going to give you that link in the chat in a moment if you want to plug in your address or even just the zip code or even the name of the city that you're in, and you'll get a map that you can zoom in and out of and get a lot of detail. So I'm highly, highly going to encourage folks to get acquainted with the indigenous people whose land you currently occupy. And those may be your own ancestors as well. So I'm going to give you that in the chat in a moment, but I'm going to show you a couple of other things, and then we'll come back to the map later if we're still curious. And let me tell you a little bit about me. My name is Taina, and my name comes from the Taino people, or the current name of the people that lived in the Caribbean and have lived in the Caribbean for millennia. I am a master urban gardener. I became acquainted with the trustees and all of the great programming a long time ago. And my introduction to the trustees was through City Natives, which is a community space in the Mattapan area where folks pre-COVID, we were able to gather and do community learning, right? We attended workshops, and community access has been growing, right, as the pandemic moves through how we interact with each other in public spaces. I'm not entirely sure what's happening with programming there this year, but I'm excited to at least go get my seedlings and get some native plants that I can bring into my garden. So I'm an urban gardener, and that means that I spend a lot of time learning about plants. I'm a budding herbalist. I'm a budding forager. I'm learning to identify plants that I don't particularly grow in my gardens, but that grow around me. And I'm also a mama. I have a son, and I'll tell you about him as I talk about plants and how I'm growing as a human, and I'm teaching my child how to interact with his environment as he grows as well. I mentioned earlier that I have a project, Sankofa Anacaona Botanicals, and essentially the project is a mobile apothecary. I don't have a brick and mortar store. I'm not sure if I'll develop one in the near future, but right now it's a traveling apothecary that offers plant-based products for health and wellness. And that looks like tea blends and skincare products. They're handcrafted in my home in small batches with locally sourced plant materials. A lot of it I grow, a lot of it I forage, a lot of it I harvest from local community spaces that I have relationships with. And I'm also an artist, and a lot of my art is heavily influenced and inspired by botanical art. I do some ceramics related to art, to plants. And I mentioned earlier that my lineage is from the Caribbean, I'm from the Dominican Republic, present day, right? Dominican Republic, Haiti. And I also call in my Afro-Indigenous roots in my learning and in how I navigate my environment. So I want to tell you about some of my teachers in a moment as well. But for now, I want you to think about, right? How does the land that you currently live on, right? How does it support you, right? How does it support your health, right? So your relationship to the land that you currently call home, the land that you visit when you get a chance to travel, how does the relationship, how does the consciousness of your relationship with the land impact your overall health and wellness, right? So that looks like, right, learning to grow, right? Plants that could be used for food, plants could be used for medicine. And whether you have a home or a community garden, I want to give you a couple of tips for growing plants. So those could be in a garden if you have one, or in a windowsill if you don't have a garden. And then look at some of the culinary uses for these plants. And well, not, maybe not so much the culinary, because these are common culinary plants. I'll focus more on the medicinal aspects of these plants, right? So we'll be answering these questions throughout our time together, right? The relationship to the land and how it supports health and wellness, and then growing and using and supporting ourselves with plants in our food and our medicine. Oh, I'm going backwards. So there are two people who I want to, pay my respects to, two people that I consider my teachers. I've never met them. One of them transitioned, so I haven't met them in person, but one of them is Robin Wall Kimmerer. Robin Wall Kimmerer is an Indigenous Potawatomi human, right? She's an author, she's a botanist. She loves to bring language to the plant world, right? So she brings, she talks about how plants communicate, how they relate, the relationships that plants have. And one of the things that she said that really resonates with me as someone who was born elsewhere from where I currently live is that the land knows you, right? Even when we're lost, right? So even when we lose sense of our purpose, the land that we live on, the land that cares for us, knows us, right? And she speaks of that connection, that reciprocity that happens when we're conscious of the fact that we are of the land, right? The idea of land ownership is one that has distorted, right, our relationship to the land and how we exchange energy with the land. And Robin Wall Kimmerer, she's the author of Braiding Sweetgrass and a few other books. She's a professor as well. She's a botany professor. And she talks about Indigenous technologies and traditions and the relationship of humans, right? So bridging science, right? Western science and how we understand plant behavior, right? Botany. And she talks about the language that her Indigenous lineage has brought to the plant world. So if you don't know who she is, look her up. She is, she does a lot of talks and she does workshops and conversations. So if she comes around next time, I would suggest that you visit and sit with her while she talks about human relationship and the plant world. Right. So remember that no matter where you are, the land knows who we are, right? Even when we're not sure of who we are. So I want to bring and elevate this person as one of my teachers. Right? I'm learning through her. This is who she is. And she's a Potawatomi Indigenous woman. And then the other person who I want to bring into the room, she's an ancestor now. I also think of her as my teacher, and her name is Wangari Maathai. And she was a Kenyan environmental activist and the founder of the Green Belt in Africa, right? So she was someone who left her homeland to go study. And when she returned 4 years later, she realized that the lush land that she grew on in Kenya had been completely decimated by the logging industry. And what happens when profit is placed over environment and profit is placed over human, right? So she's someone who experienced a lot of physical violence, right? She was physically attacked and jailed because she stood up for her right to heal the land, right? So she's someone who started a movement that encouraged people to plant millions of trees in an area that had been decimated. And I came across this person many years ago, and this is a mantra for me as someone who wants to learn how to work with plants. Right? I have a small business where I'm making botanicals, but I'm still learning, and I know that my journey as a student of plant, right, of the plant world, plant medicine will never reach a destination, right? Because I'm always going to learn and grow. So she says, we are called to assist the earth to heal her wounds, and in the process heal our own. We are called to assist the earth to heal her wounds, and in the process heal our own. And that means that as we take care of our bodies, or for me at least, it means that as I take care of my body, that I take care of the planet, right? The larger body that contains me. And when we do what we need to make sure that our waters, our land, our air are not polluted, then we ensure that our own bodies are not polluted, right? So these two women, Robin Wall Kimmerer and Wangari Maathai, are two teachers whose wisdom I opened my ears to. And I wanted to highlight them because we're still celebrating Indigenous people every day. We're celebrating the contributions of women every day, right? Not just a fraction of our calendar year. So bringing the spirit and the energy of those two women, I want to tell you the things that I've learned from them and also the things that I continue to learn from plants. And this is Wangari Maathai. She transitioned a few years ago. And she too wrote and left some guidance for us to follow, right? So look them both up. I'll share their names in the chat in a little bit if you want a refresher later. And then I want to ask you, right? So let me unshare my screen actually, because I would like for this to be a conversation, right? So I can hear from you. We may not all be able to share all at once, but I'll invite you to share in a moment. And I just realized that I maybe should have left give me 1 second. I'm having a little tech issue over here. So I want to hear from you. What are some spaces that you feel connected to? You know what, let me reshare the screen and then I'll ask if one of you can unmute to share. What are some spaces that you currently feel connected to, right? So how many of you have access to home gardens or public spaces, right? And these could be community gardens, these could be porch or balcony or window spaces, or maybe you're growing indoor plants, any local parks or green spaces. I'm naming some of the spaces that I feel connected to here in Boston. I mentioned earlier City Natives in Mattapan, the Nature Center also in Mattapan, Franklin Park. The Arboretum is one place where I feel pretty rooted, where I know if when I need to find green space and connection to the plant, I know that I can go to the Arboretum at different parts of the year, and I know exactly which parts of that place I can visit and have interaction with green spaces or green living things, right? In the winter, I may go hang out where the pine trees and the conifers are. I forgot to mention some of my very local parks. The Malcolm X Park, which is right around the corner from me, right? There's another space that's very close to me as well. A community garden where I spend a lot of time on Thornton Street, where I met Melanie actually, who's in this space now. So I would love to hear from one of you. What is the space that you feel connected to? And I think somebody's mic is already open, so maybe you can go ahead and share.
Well, I will go. It's
Yes,
Melanie. I feel similarly to you about the space on Thornton Street and right around the corner at Fulda Street and Highland Street. Just, it's a community garden and urban farm space. And I love the sound, the smells, the feel, being there, being able to watch as things grow and to help things grow, growing in community has just been so wonderful. Being around you, learning from you has just been incredible. And I am seeing a lot of people are answering in the chat.
Would you read some of those?
I will.
Thank you.
Yes. So I'm seeing, so many. I connect by farming and walking my dog. The Mystic River Reservation, Mission Hill, Jamaica Pond, Muddy River. I feel connected to East Boston where I work and the Mary Ellen Welch Greenway where I have an installation. Oh, that's wonderful. Maybe we'll hear a little more about that. The Neponset Riverwalk, parks with conifers. Jen is recognizing Fort Hill, where we are in that space on Thornton Street. I see my backyard, Spot Pond and Crystal Lake. The Esplanade and the river, Wrights Pond and the Fells, Carr Park, the wild parts of Franklin Park. Let's see, the Ed Cooper Gardens in Roxbury. Yep, Roxbury has wonderful, beautiful community gardens right, probably 4 or 5 within less than a quarter mile of each other. The Charles River Basin, when the cherry blossoms are in bloom. Oh, such a sight. Yes, I agree. Maria says, Franklin Park, I have a seasonal spiritual practice of visiting there. Also, I have a lot of memories there of community events and celebrations I've been a part of and have scattered the ashes of a companion animal that I love there. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Sue says, community garden, JP Pond, Arboretum, Forest Hill Cemetery, Blackstone River. We have Jamaica Pond again, beaches in the Cape. I love that. Let's see what else we have. Joyce has access to the land around her home, the nearby state forest, a community garden in the nearby city. And Joyce's initial, strongest, and first connection to the land was with her Portuguese grandmother's garden and grape arbor in Fairhaven, Massachusetts. Oh, beautiful. Woods and Parks of Medfield. And Melissa says Nightingale Community Garden in Blue Hills. Fantastic community garden. I'm a fan.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Melanie. Thank you. Thank you. And actually, Melanie, while you were reading, I started taking a peek at the chat too, and I'm seeing a lot of interactions. Some spaces that I missed, but that I've been getting to know, are the the Forest Hill Cemetery. It is so beautiful in there. And I don't know why I've lived in Boston so long and I haven't really spent much time in there. I think prior to the pandemic year, I've been there once. And it's such a beautiful space. Thank you all so much for bringing all of those magical spaces into our conversation. I'm excited to see, I want to see your faces in a second, so I'll have to unshare the screen in a little bit. I love that you're connected to spaces. I'm wondering how many of you are keeping track of who's waking up right now, right? So one of the spaces that I can walk to is the Thornton Garden. And I happened to be there yesterday with my son. And if you're not familiar with this space, it's a really, really wonderful space that brings community to growing our food, right? Being sustainable and also sharing the knowledge that we all hold. I mentioned earlier that Melanie is someone who I met there. And I feel like whenever I see Melanie, even if I don't see her for multiple seasons, we pick right up where we left off, talking about plants, right? Because that's what we do. And I love that this space, I didn't mention earlier, that the gardeners gathering is one that I've attended so many seasons. And prior to getting involved with the Master Urban Gardener, I hadn't thought about what I could offer to people in terms of my interaction with plants, right? So I love that there's a space where I can reach a lot of you. Sue, I see you in the chat. I've gone to some of your workshops over at the Nature Center, and I'm scrolling through the chat and seeing so many of you who I'm pretty sure I've talked about plants with at some point. So I know that some of you are here because you want to learn about connection to land. And I love that all of you are sharing in the chat. Thank you for your generous sharing. And I also know that some of you may want to know about what to grow this year and how you can use it for medicine making. Right, so I have a few plants and I'm pretty sure that if you already garden or cook, that you're familiar with some of these. So I'll tell you what I do with them in terms of medicine, and then I'll show you a couple of examples of things that I do. I won't go into full-on medicine making just in the essence of time, but I will have some upcoming workshops that I can tell you about. So if you're interested, and also Sue is someone that I would say, look up what they're up to, what she's up to, because Sue, you're an amazing teacher. And you introduced me to bitters a long time ago. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And there's a wealth of knowledge in this conversation. So do share what you do. And if you want to connect with folks, I'm gonna nudge you to do that because it's warm enough to be outside, right? And it would be great to connect offline if you feel moved to. I know that I'll be reaching out to a lot of you and I'll be seeing a lot of you soon. So let me see where the order of my slides right now. Oh, it brings me to Thornton. So I went there yesterday with my son, and my son has been growing in the space. We've been sharing a little bit about the relationship of my family to this particular space. I've been in a relationship with this land 4 seasons now, maybe a little bit longer. And I love seeing my child's growth, and I gauge it to the things and the elements that he interacts with. So there's a tree back here. And I'm thinking, I don't have a picture of him to show you, but I wish I did, 4 years ago, of how tiny he looked on that tree. And this was him yesterday. He's turning 9 in July. I love that this is a space where he feels safe and he's comfortable, right? And he's able to not just be himself, curious and climbing trees and climbing things, but that he can be super, super nurturing and tender when he's interacting with the plants that are growing there. Right now, the garden is in some transition, right? So there aren't a lot of plants that we can see here. But I did take a peek of who is growing. And yesterday I saw nettles were up. And I don't have a picture of nettle, and I should have, because nettle's one of my medicine that I hold dear. And also chickweed, right? So they're excited, they're ready, they're blooming, right? So I'm going to encourage you next time that you are out and about, that you look closely at the sidewalks, and if you have a garden, that you go outside and you look at who's coming up already, right? There's more life springing right now that we may know if we're indoors. So this is one space that I hold very close to my heart, a place that I've been able to heal, right? These past 3 years, right? A place that I know it's a safe space. And even if I'm not taking any of the medicine that I harvest there, if I'm not taking it internal, just being on the land is healing enough, right? So when we talk about healing with the land, we're not just talking about the things that we can harvest and ingest, right? We're talking about the medicine that comes with putting our hands and our feet on the soil, right? There's scientifically proven there are microbes in the soil that change the chemistry of our brain, right? Changes enough to get us out of a funk, right? So when we're dealing with heavy emotions, when we're dealing with depression and all the things that get in our way of living our fullness, there is magic to being a gardener. There's magic to being a farmer, right? Farmers tend to live the longest compared to people who live in cities. And it's not that they're eating delicious, fresh food. Well, in addition to that, and breathing fresher air, but it's that they're in direct contact with the soil, right? So when we lose touch with the land, we lose touch with ourselves, right? There are parts of our body, parts of our DNA that is triggered, right, by how we interact with soil and the land. So if you don't have a garden, next time you're out at a public park, if you can, take off your shoes and just plant your feet on the ground. Or there's true healing to that. It's not just hippie stuff. Maybe I don't want to label it anything, but there is medicine to being in direct contact with the land, right? So healing with the land is a real thing. Now let me see if this brings us over to our slides where we're looking at. Oh yeah, getting started. Oh, let me back up. See, now it's jumping a few ahead. So I'm going to jump into getting started, right? So if for someone who is interested in learning to garden, grow your own medicine, right? This is a perfect time, right? This year is the perfect year to get started. Right now is the perfect time to get started. There are multiple ways, right, that you can do that. If you have land that you can set up a raised bed or containers, great. If you don't have access to that, then you can grow something on a windowsill, even if it's not super sunny. So 2 ways, right, that you can start. So you can start your own seeds. It's not too late to start seeds, right? Those of us who garden seriously know that some things should have started a while ago, but some things could be started now, right? And there are benefits to starting seeds, right? And one of them is that you get to see the process of the plant growth, right? You get to interact with it, you get to nurture it. And then when you first see a tiny peak of green, right, on your soil, it's one of the most exciting things that you can, I'm going to speak for myself. One of the most exciting things that we could experience. But if you don't have the resources, right, time as a resource, or space, or enough sunlight as a resource, and you know that you're not going to be able to tend to these babies as they're growing, and you can go ahead and buy seedlings, right? So there will be a lot of plant sales coming up. So keep an eye out for who's growing plants. I will have them available later for seedlings. And one of the benefits to buying seedlings is that you get a head start on your gardening season, right? And then you also have a higher chance of your plant surviving if it's already established and a little bigger, right? So 2 different ways. I would say you can try them both. You could try one this season and try something else next year. I don't have enough sunny windows, or maybe I have a lot of plants on my windows already. So I don't have space to start my seeds this year. So I'm going to go ahead and get some seedlings to get started. But I may start a couple of plants that I know I won't find seedlings for right now. And let's see, I want to show you some of my container, and then also a little snapshot of the Thornton garden when it's full bloom. There's an herb spiral there that's really beautiful. If you haven't visited yet, please do. And you'll probably see me there at some point. And then at home, I have some containers of plants that are annual. I have some calendula here. And then I have a couple of planters that I don't even touch, right? I just let them be. I just clean them out in between seasons, of some of the perennials that I'll show you in a second, right? And if you're new to gardening and planting, you know that annual are plants that you plant every year. right? The vegetables and the flowers that we consume. And then perennials are the plants that, like the herbs and some of the fruits that once they're established, that's all you need. You don't have to do anything but love them when they come back every season. They'll come back. So a lot of the herbs, all the herbs I'm showing you are actually are perennials. So once you set them up in your garden, you don't have to bother starting seeds every year. And then a lot of these are culinary. There's tarragon, and then also echinaceas in the back and a few other ones. I won't focus too much on here because I'm going to show you some other things. So I'm going to go ahead and move this way. Another peek of some containers that have a home. You know, a few seasons ago, or maybe 6 years ago, I stopped weeding my garden. I stopped pulling out the plants that I hadn't planted because I started to know who those, maybe even longer than 6 years ago, I knew who those plants were, and I knew that they were medicinal and that they were edible, right? So whenever I would see dandelion pop up in my bed, I would just let them be. Like chickweed, I would just let them be because I know that they're food and that they're also medicine. At some point, give me 1 second, please. That was my 9-year-old popping in. So plants that I know now, right, I just let them be. And then that just means that I get more medicine and food that I didn't have to necessarily plant. But I know that at some point, like if I want tomatoes and my container or my garden bed is covered in dandelion, I may not get a lot of tomatoes if I let all the dandelions stay. So I may pull a few of them out, but I'll use them in medicine as I pull them out. Right? I don't just yank them out and compost them. So getting to know who grows in your garden at different times of the year would make it helpful. All right, let me bring us to the next. So now I'm going to tell you about the plants. Oh, I think I might have skipped. Did I skip a slide? No. I'm going to tell you about a few plants that you may already be familiar with in food. Oregano is something, is a spice, it's an herb that you'll find in a lot of seasonings, and you'll find them in sauces. They're perennial, right? That means that once you set them in your container, they'll come back season after season without you needing to replant it. They're native to the Mediterranean, and they like hot but not super, super wet climates. And they'll do fine in full sun or partial sun. So if you have a shady place, they may still do okay. There are many benefits to working with oregano. And think about when you're using it for medicine versus using it for food, right? The quantity is different, right? So the amount of oregano that you would put in your cooking, maybe a teaspoon or a tablespoon if you're making something that's really strong flavored. What you would use in a pot of soup, right? You would probably double or triple that amount for a cup of tea, right? So the amount of the plant that you use will increase if you're using it for medicine versus just adding it to sprinkling it on your food. Medicinally, oregano is really great for the digestive system. It supports digestion. It is wonderful for the respiratory system, right? It moves mucus out of the airways. It promotes healthy skin, right? So if you use it topically, and also it supports the nervous system, which in turn supports with anxiety. You can use all of the aerial parts, all of the parts that grow above ground. I haven't worked with the roots. I'm not sure. Maybe there are medicinal uses to it that I'm not familiar with, but I work with all the parts that grow above the ground. That means the stems, the flowers, and the leaves themselves. You can use it dry, right? You can work with it fresh as well. If you were making something like oil, right? Because you can do a bunch of things, you can use them in many different techniques. If you were going to make oil with any of the plants that I'm going to show you, I would suggest you use the dry version of the herb. That way you don't run the risk of getting mold in your oil. But if you're making a tincture, if you're making tea, you're using it for a bath, you can use fresh or dry. If you want to infuse honey, right, you can put it in honey as well. You may want to work with also with the dry herb. So teas, tinctures, which in essence are extractions or concentrated versions of the medicine. You can make ointments with it. You can create foot soaks, foot baths. And of course, you can use the infused oils. Thyme is similar to oregano in the sense that they require similar care, though thyme prefers their soil drier than oregano, right? A little sandier, soil that drains really well. Also a perennial, also from the Mediterranean. Sometimes you'll find them together. They could be used interchangeably in some preparations. They also support with the respiratory system. They support with menstrual cramps. They boost the immune system, support digestion. They have antibacterial, antifungal properties, and that means that it promotes healthy skin, right? Healthy scalp if you put it in your hair. And again, you can use the parts that grow above the ground. And very similar to oregano, you can make tinctures and you can use it in fire cider. I'm going to show you fire cider slide later. You can use it in syrups too. You can use it to infuse vinegar if you want flavored vinegar. Mint, pretty sure a lot of you are familiar with mint, or at least mint flavored things. Also a perennial and from the Mediterranean. They like disturb soil, right? So if the soil has been messed with, they'll do okay. They're very, very resilient plants, and they grow wherever they want to grow. So that means that if you want to grow other things, if you want to grow other plants, and maybe putting your mint in a container instead of putting it in directly in your garden may be helpful, because they do spread. Unless you want a whole field of mint, and then that's perfect. There are many varieties. I feel like every year I meet a new type of mint. There's pineapple mint, there's chocolate mint, spearmint, peppermint, a whole long line. They're very they come in many shapes and forms. They're great for the common cold, right? We may already know them as a plant that's good for upset stomachs. Rather, they support the immune system, the digestive system. They're also great for respiratory conditions. They support with menstrual cramps. They clear sinus. And even though they're a little bit spicy when we drink them, they're actually cooling plants as opposed to heating plants. Like ginger may be a heating plant, for example. And that means that they remove some of the heat from the body. So if we're experiencing headaches because maybe we're overheating, right? Or maybe we have like excessive sweating, right? So this may be a plant that might help cool the body. It provides a caffeine-free, right, energy boost, promotes healthy hair. And that's one of the reasons perhaps why we may see it in hair products and lotions and things that we put in our hair. And also reduces stress and supports with anxiety. Again, similar to the other plants that I mentioned earlier, the plants above the soil are the ones that are commonly used. You can work with them fresh, you can work with them dry. And actually all of the plants that I'm sharing with you, their taste is a lot stronger when the plant is dry versus when it's fresh, right? So you may need a little bit less of it if you're using the dry version of the plant, because it's a lot stronger when it dries. Very similar to the other plants, you can use it for teas and tinctures and vinegars, syrups. You can use it in creams. I don't tend to use it in topical too much. I love drinking mint, and I like that the heat and the spiciness in it when I drink it, but I don't like it so much on my skin, right? So if you want to cool off your skin, that might be something to look into. Again, grow them in a container if you want to grow other things, because they are very resilient and they will take over. And once you have them, once they set in place, they're committed to stay, right? So keep that in mind. The other plants will spread as well, the oregano and the thyme, but not as fast and vigorous as the mint will. And then we have sage. Sage is a wonderful plant. You may find sage in meat or fish dishes if you're a meat eater. But they're wonderful in tea. They're also perennial from the Mediterranean, and they're okay with hot or cold, dry environments. Full sun and well-drained soil is what they like. You can start them from seeds inside and transplant them, or just get a little cutting, right? Or get a seedling, and they set pretty easily. If you are using sage for medicine, you can have like a pinch of it in food and it's fine. But if you're someone who's nursing, you may not want to take it in large amounts because it can reduce milk production. So keep that in mind if you ever use it as as medicine, as opposed to, which again is a more concentrated amount than what you would use in food. And its medicinal benefits also include digestive and respiratory system and many other. I'm just giving you like some of the most common ones, but there are many uses for all of these plants that we're sharing here. Similar parts of the plant are used, similar ways to prepare it than the previous ones. I love adding sage to a simmer pot. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with simmer pots. You just have a big pot of water on your stove. You keep it in low heat. You fill it with water and some herbs, and then you just keep it on boil, a low boil. It's a great way to clean the air, right? If folks have colds or are sick at home, or if you just want to clean out the air at home, you can just boil a handful of sage and it'll clear out the air. And it's great if you're congested and you do a steam, right? Sage is a really wonderful plant for that. And many other uses such as tinctures and ointments and oils and whatnot. Then we have lavender. Again, a perennial Mediterranean plant. They like dry, sunny, hot environments. From my experience with them, they like a lot of sun, and they'll be fine throughout the year. Depending on the variety, you'll get your blooms at different points of the year. So we may be familiar with lavender as a plant that we use to scent products, right? Lotions and body care products are often scented in lavender. And aside from smelling wonderful, right? One of the reasons perhaps that it's used in so many products is that it's a plant that it's really soothing. It's one of my go-to aromatherapy plants. Just smelling the plant brings calmness to most people. There are some folks who have the opposite reaction with lavender, who may not enjoy the floral sweetness of lavender. But lavender is a plant that could be used internally as well, right? You can use it in tea forms. It does not taste as sweet as it smells, however. It actually has a bitter taste to it. Very surprising because it smells really sweet. It's a plant that you can use for skin health, right? It supports with burns and acne and other skin conditions. The aerial parts, the flowers and the stems and the leaves. And you can make a delicious infused honey with lavender. We just put some dry lavender in a jar and you cover it with honey and let it sit in a sunny window for a couple of weeks. And then you can either leave the plant material in there or you can remove it. And then you can do a bunch of other things. Insect repellent, you can make a sleep pillow, right? It's a plant that's relaxing and soothing to most of us. So there's a plant that may be good for sleep time, and have it as part of your nighttime routine. And let me see what else. And here's some pictures of medicine in the works, right? So when I was mentioning tinctures earlier, if you're not familiar with tinctures, those are extractions that are made using the dry or the fresh plant material. And this is any part of the plant, right? So if you can use fruit, or you can use the root, you can use the bark of a plant. And you essentially put an amount of if you're using fresh, right, there's a slight formula to it. If you're using fresh material and it's like leafy, then you fill your jar maybe like 3/4 of the way, and then you cover it with a menstruum, a liquid. And this liquid could be alcohol, right? So it could be, some people use like higher proof alcohols, or grain alcohol, or they just use vodka or something that they might have at home. You can infuse oils, you can infuse vinegar, and then you can get into other materials that could be infused. You can add honey to it if you want something sweeter, right? So you put in your herbs in your jar, you put in your menstruum, and then you cover it and you let it sit for a few weeks. Generally 6, 8 weeks. I tend to make them in large batches, so mine sit a little bit longer. And then when the plant is ready, I do date it so I don't forget. When the plant is ready, I strain the plant material, and what I keep is the liquid. Right, so tinctures essentially are extracted in alcohol. You may have, if you add honey or some kind of sweetener, then you end up with an elixir, right? So a sweet tincture. You can have vinegar, apple cider vinegar is one of the more common vinegars, but you can use other vinegars. And if you add honey to your vinegar, then you get an oxymel. Fire cider, if you're familiar with it, is essentially an oxymel, right? Because you're adding plant material, you're adding vinegar. And actually, some people don't add any, they just do the vinegar. They don't add honey to it or a sweetener, but it can easily become an oxymel. Fire cider is one of my go-to winter medicines. And the ones that I have here, these from a while ago, so I don't have them anymore. Let me see the next slide. So fire cider. So I'm going to give fire cider some attention because it's one of my go-to ways of consuming plant medicine. So fire cider, in essence, it's a combination of culinary ingredients. So garlic, onion, ginger, horseradish if you like a lot of heat. And then you have some kind of citrus and some kind of heat, right? In this case, the heat would come from peppers. I love jalapeno and cayenne pepper as my source of heat. Ginger is another source of heat. And for citrus, I generally do lemon or lime. I scrub the lemon lime really well, and then I slice it up with the skin still on it. Sometimes I add orange peels. I know folks add oranges to theirs. I prefer just the peel. I usually just eat the orange while I'm prepping my fire cider. And then I'll do some kind of herb that I have around. Thyme and in this case, thyme and also sage were the ones that ended up in one of my combinations. I love turmeric as another ingredient to my fire cider. So I would say a base of my cider generally is onion, garlic, ginger, and turmeric, some kind of pepper, and some kind of citrus. And then whatever herbs I have around. Sometimes I will add other things like rose hip, right? So the fruit of the rose plant. I may add reishi, which is a medicinal mushroom. I may add some echinacea root, right? So I'll do different, and hibiscus is another one of my go-to for my ciders. And I basically cut up all the materials really, really small, put them in a jar, cover them with apple cider vinegar. And then I put a piece of parchment paper on top and then I cap it, right? The reason for that is because if I'm using a metal lid for my jar, the vinegar will corrode the metal, right? And essentially will ruin the medicine. So putting a piece of parchment between the lid and the jar will protect your vinegar. And you may need to replace your parchment halfway through the process because that vinegar, it's once it soaks up the parchment, it could still make its way to the metal, right? So keep that in mind. And I let it sit for about 8 weeks. And at the end of those 8 weeks, I strain the medicine and then I sweeten it, right? So I wait until after I've harvested the medicine before I add any honey to it. And I know folks may not work with honey, so you can leave it out. It's not necessarily a key ingredient, but I love honey for its sweetness, but also for antimicrobial, antibacterial properties and many other things. Like honey on its own is very medicinal. But it's not, like I said, it's not a required ingredient. And also you can arrange your combination however you choose. If you don't like things that are super, super hot, then you can just add less or maybe no peppers and just add a little ginger to it. I know some folks may also add peppercorn to their fire cider. So there are many, many different recipes. And then the ways to use fire cider is to take a shot of it. If it's just for regular care and tonic, I may do a shot of it daily. If I'm coming down with something and I know that my body's working, trying to get rid of something, then I'll take it throughout the day. And then also it could be a great addition to food, right? So if you have a recipe that calls for vinegar, instead of using regular vinegar, then you reach for your fire cider. And it also makes a really delicious salad dressing. And Melania, I'm not sure if it's you or somebody else that told me that they always add a teaspoon of fire cider to their soups. So whenever they eat soup, at the very end, they add it.
I like that idea. I mentioned that I sometimes make a seltzer out of it. So I'll put carbonated water, and make a seltzer out of the fire cider. And I have your fire cider right here.
Yes. So fire cider, it's a wonderful medicine. And then for folks who want to have extractions, right, the benefit of the extraction is that you have it ready, it's concentrated, and you can travel with it, right? So if you don't have time, or if you're just not able to make yourself a cup of tea, right, you can take a shot of fire cider and you can just take it on the go or put it on a salad. Right? Add it to your food. Melania, I got to try making a drink with my fire cider. It's usually so spicy, and I'm just like, okay, let me just get it over with and move on, or I'll add it to my food. Either way works.
I like the flavor. I like the spice.
I do too, but yeah, so sometimes taking like a whole ounce shot of fire cider. If I do it in the morning, I'm like, okay, this is a good way to start the morning.
Yeah.
But then, we take the medicine when we need it, as we need it. You can use whatever kind of onion you have access to. You can use horseradish if you want some extra heat. And then the ratio of ingredients, it's up to you. Right? You can make a blend however makes sense. I love this picture here on the left. These tiny garlic bulbs grew in my garden. Actually, all of these all of these plants grew in my garden. And I was really proud that year that I was able to make, I had some peppers that year too. I was able to make fire cider where the majority of the ingredients came from my garden. So that made me really happy. Store-bought things are fine too, right? So we can't grow, we can always get it at the store. And then with oils, right? Infused oils are wonderful. Again, I mentioned earlier that if you're making oil, to use dry plant material so your oil doesn't get moldy. And the oil could be used for food, right? Depending on the plant material that you work with. You can also make medicine with it. The food is medicine, right? So you can either cook with it or you can make lotions and hair care products out of it. You can just use it as an oil on your skin and also for your hair. But if you add beeswax or some kind of wax, then you can take your oil and solidify it so you can travel with it, throw it in your bag. So when you need to moisturize, especially during gardening season and winter season, actually all year round, but especially during gardening season, where we're depleting our skin for moisture from all the digging and all the hard work that we'll do later in our gardens, then replenishing and healing the skin with ointment will be a great way to bring that full circle. Here's a little chickweed heart over here. My chickweed is super, super juicy when I harvest it, so I usually let it dry before I use it for oils. It's amazing for pestos. Right? If you can't wait to make something out of your garden and you have chickweed growing right now, make some pesto. It is amazing. One of the beautiful things about chickweed is that it has saponin, which essentially it's a plant constituent or chemical that cleans your body, right? It's a really wonderful detox plant. So you're scrubbing your body from the inside out, right? In a really gentle way. It's loaded in vitamins, it's loaded in a lot of trace minerals. It's wonderful for healing skin conditions, right? And you can eat it, you can put it on your skin. There's a lot that you can do with it. I like to add them to my smoothies when I have them. So I'll just throw a handful in there. It just gives me an extra, especially my morning smoothies, right? I get an extra dose of nutrient in my food. For my salves and lotions, I like to add other oils. Generally, I work with olive oil because that's what I use in my cooking. But I'll add some shea butter and some cocoa butter just for some extra skin healing properties. And it'll also help solidify the oil a little bit more. Let's see. And then if you're growing and harvesting and foraging and you want to save your bounty for later, right? So you'll need to figure out how to dry it so you can preserve it. I often dry multiple plants at a time. And even though I know who they are at this point, I try to label them because at some point they may smell similar while they're dry, right? So when I'm storing my plant material, I want to make sure that I know who they are. So when I share that plant, that I can tell the person what the plants are. But you figure out whatever system works for you. I usually bundle them and hang them upside down away from direct sunlight. And then once they're crispy, right? You don't want them to get too brown because then you're losing the plant material. Once they're dry, you crush them up, put them in a jar, label the jar, and then you have some medicine to use later. I find that the small mesh bags, those small produce bags, are great for drying things that will dry and shrivel. That way you don't lose your plant while it's drying. Like sometimes they just break off the bundle. Oregano sometimes can do that, and also thyme, because their leaves get really tiny when they dry. So you can dry them in those mesh bags. It allows for airflow, and then you don't risk losing your plant material while it dries. So I wash my plants really well. I shake out any excess water. I hang them right in small bundles. I hang them to dry, and then I label my jars and keep the jars out of sunlight, right? So you don't, so it doesn't continue to break down the plant medicine, and you can have it for later. So I want to make some space for reflections. Actually, let me show you I'm going to share my contact with you if you would like it, and then I'll make space for some reflections. I'm not sure how much time we have left. Lost track of time. But if you want to learn more, you can find me on Instagram at the moment, working on setting up some other platforms to reach folks. But you can find me at Sankofa Anacaona Botanicals, and I could put that in the chat as well. And you'll see information on there about growing, harvesting, medicine making. I love to cook, so you'll see some food related content. And I'm also a visual artist, so you'll see some plant related art making on there as well. Events and pop-up markets, you'll see information for that on there as well. And then you'll see lots of plant pictures, right? You'll see plants at different stages, right? So let me get out of here so I can make room for questions and I can see folks.
And we have about 8 minutes, Taina.
Perfect.
8, 9
Thank you.
minutes.
I know we had a question about if you could recommend any good sort of sources for some of the recipes, or where you get your kind of, you mentioned the olive oil, but other things that would make the salves and oils and things.
Okay, that's a really good question. So I am in the process of sourcing some of my things from abroad right now. The olive oil, I usually just get it when I go food shopping. So I don't have a place right now that, or a product that I can recommend for the olive oil itself. But food grade is perfect. If it's okay to eat it, then most likely it's okay to put it on your skin. Shea butter, it's a material that I'm really striving to source ethically. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with shea butter, but it comes from it's the nut of the shea tree, and it's a tree that grows in the western part of Africa, and it's work that women do, right? So women are the ones that harvest and process, traditionally at least. Women are the ones that are harvesting it and processing the shea nut that becomes that beautiful shea butter that you can buy on its own or add it to other products. And because there's a huge demand for shea butter right now in the market, right? Because it shows up in a lot of cosmetics. That means that there's also room, right? When there's demand for stuff, there's also room for people to not be honest with how they source their material, and that opens up space for people to be exploited, right? So I'm really conscious of shea butter and the social implications that come with me not being able to grow my shea trees and make my own shea butter. I found a women-run collective in Ghana that it's working on setting up distribution for the US. So I'm hoping to make that my my source for my shea butter, because it's one that I personally use a lot, and I love to include them in my product. And I know at least that the women and the people involved in that process are getting compensated fairly for their labor, but also that their community are thriving, right? So it's essentially feeding local economy in these communities, and which essentially supporting the children and the education and the health of the people that are making the product. I use beeswax in my products. I have the blessing of having friends who are beekeepers, and so I barter for my beeswax locally. So my beeswax, it's from around the Boston area and right outside of Boston. So I haven't needed to look for another source. I would say get to know your beekeepers. I would say reach out to BABA, the Beekeeping Association in Boston. They do a lot of education around beekeeping if you want to learn, but also I wonder if they have access to beeswax, right? So if you want to include it in your medicine and you want to make sure that you're essentially contributing to environmentally sound ways of getting your materials. And then the other ingredient that I don't grow is cacao or cocoa butter. But the collective that I found in Ghana also produces cocoa butter. So my hope is that I'll get both of those two things from that space. But I've used things that are probably not ethically, right? Because we're not perfect. And the more we know, the better we need to do. I've used things that I buy, and this is not a shaming plug by no means. Work with what you have, but if you're concerned about how your consumption impacts other people, then do the work that needs to be done, right? So educate ourselves, and you're doing that already by showing up to this conference. Find the sources. I'm sure that there are ethical, environmentally sound spaces that are producing olive oil. And actually, I just remembered one. I don't know why it escaped me earlier. Equal Exchange. They're more known for their coffee and their cacao. They do source olive oil that's fair trade, and I would even say organic. So if olive oil is material that you want to work with and you want it to be more sustainably sourced and fairly traded, then Equal Exchange may be a route. I'm pretty sure there are other ones, but that's the one that comes to mind now. And at some point, once I still, because I'm still in the works with the cocoa and the shea butter group, once I solidify that component, then I'm going to share that information on my Instagram. And actually, I can do a post about them as well, right? Because they're present on social media. And then whatever I don't grow, plant wise, I'm striving to work with plant material that I can grow, or that I can wildcraft, or that I can find locally. But there are things that I just appreciate that I may not be able to grow because they don't grow here, or because I may not have the space. And then those things I strive to get as ethically, sustainably, organically grown as possible. And yeah, but you work with what you have. If you don't grow it, see if you can find it in your community, right? Because somebody else may be growing it. And do get to know the land that's around you, right? As I mentioned earlier, I forage, right? So there's an abundance of medicine that grows around me that I don't have to find containers to grow, right? Or maybe these are trees, so I'm not going to grow a big tree in a small container. And those of us who are in the Boston area, we have a lot of places where we can get evergreens. I didn't even talk about conifers, pine trees, right? That would be a whole nother conversation that would take us a few more hours. But working with a local medicine that's indigenous to this part of the country, for white pine is a medicine that's wonderful for us to get to know. I will say very clearly that it is indigenous medicine, just like sage, white sage is, and cedar. So when we're working with medicine that's traditional to other people, it doesn't mean that we're not allowed to use them, but we need to be mindful and intentional about how we use it, right? Because these medicines, white sage, for example, I won't harp a ton on appropriating practices because that's not why we're here. But I will say that if you're someone who wants to work with sage, I will highly, highly encourage you to grow garden sage at home or in your community instead of spending money on white sage. White sage is beautiful. It smells wonderful, but unfortunately it's a threatened plant right now. Threatening meaning that when it grows wild, the way that it's harvested is done in a really unsustainable, disrespectful way, where the plant is completely pulled out of the ground and it doesn't give it enough time to regenerate. And then now we're putting not only the plant at risk, but also an ancient practice that has respected this plant, right? It is an indigenous medicine. And if that's not your lineage, know that you have other plants that you can work with. And a lot of those I mentioned earlier, right? Lavender can easily replace white sage. Garden sage can easily replace, right? You can make bundles, you can burn white sage, but you can also do that with other sages that you may already grow because you're going to put them in your sauces. I'm trying to see what's happening. Oh, and somebody's offering some gems, some weeds, right? Weed is a really funny word. A weed is a plant that we don't know anything about, right? And that we misjudge because we don't know them. But weeds are edible in many cases, and purslane is a wonderful plant. Most likely, if you grow in community spaces, you may see them pop up. You may see them on sidewalks, growing up from between cracks. And they're super, super rich in many nutrients and omega-3. I'm not the purslane expert, so I'm going to leave it at that. I'll just give you some general info of what I know of them. And I just want to thank you all for coming, and thank you for making time out of your Saturdays, right, to still connect. I hope that next year that we can gather in person like we've done so many, it's like number 46, right? So it's been around for a while. Can't even like meshing up my words. Thank you all so much. I wish you a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and I hope to see some of you somewhere where there are plants. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Tanya. For those who, if you registered for this, for the weekend long thing, you will get an email next week with the archives of this and the slides. If you haven't, I put the link back in that you can register. And also, of course, we'll be back tomorrow for more sessions. So there's 2 more sets of workshops. And I just wanted to share a few more links with upcoming events and the plant sale information too, for those who are interested in that. And I think with that, I don't know if Michelle is coming back in, but no, we can wrap it up, I guess, and I'll stop the recording.